Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about Bitcoin wealth concentration and why I don't see that as a big problem. So let's start off by just looking at one of the common things that people look at. So they commonly pull up this Bitcoin rich list, and so you can see here it's got all the it's like, just to explain what this is, it's saying how many addresses are there out in the Bitcoin blockchain that hold this many Bitcoins. Say 1 to 10 Bitcoins, there's 538,000 addresses that hold that many Bitcoin. And here's the rich list. So there's some addresses that literally hold $2 billion worth of value inside them. So one of the things that's a little inaccurate in thinking this way is to think of it as though it's one person, one account, and one address. Because in reality, it's not a one-to-one-to-one relationship. So you could, and actually it would be quite common for an average individual to have multiple addresses. You're not necessarily going to keep all your Bitcoins in the same one address. So a hobbyist person might have generated hundreds of addresses, and they might, depending on how they've structured their storage of Bitcoin, they might hold their Bitcoin in anywhere from 5, 10 addresses to 100 or more addresses. So just right there, that's not an accurate way of looking at this thing. And then the other thing to think about is that there are cases of Bitcoin services such as Bitcoin wallets or Bitcoin exchanges that will hold many Bitcoins on behalf of many customers. And that could be in one address. Like in this example here, which is this particular Bitcoin address is a known address that belongs to one of the large exchanges called Bitfinex, and that's their cold wallet. So that's this 178,000 Bitcoins. That's not one person's coins. That's thousands or maybe million. We're talking at least dozens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands worth of people's. Some people who are storing their Bitcoin on the exchange, which is distinct from people who have withdrawn those Bitcoins into a wallet where they hold the private keys, which is the more recommended way to go about doing this. But just from a first level, the way people are thinking about this is not quite accurate. So you've got to break that down a little bit further. The other thing is, within Bitcoin, address reuse is discouraged. So it helps keep your privacy by using different addresses rather than always taking, say, donations or transactions into the same address. So that's just another factor as well, that people are going to be always generating new addresses. So now that we've spoken through some of those first level concepts, I thought it would be good to show you guys this article by Bamboo Club, which actually shows what I think is a better way of thinking about the distribution of ownership. So you can see this article here, it's just talking about, are you in the Bitcoin 1%, a new model of the distribution of Bitcoin wealth. And so at the start, the Bamboo Club talks about some of these concepts we've just spoken through, like the distinction between people, accounts, and addresses. And then down here, he goes into this model of what might be a more accurate way to think about Bitcoin wealth. So here he's saying, here's some assumptions. So he's saying, let's think of it like it's a power law. Let's mirror Bitcoin wealth back against what global wealth distribution is. Let's assume there's 25 million Bitcoin owners and then there's no lost Bitcoins. So, and then in the article, and I'll post a link, but in the article he talks through the justification for putting each of these assumptions. And I think actually it sort of makes a bit more sense to use that way. And so once you sort of crunch out the numbers and come up with an estimate, this is, let me just find the exact page. Yeah, so this is that page. So I think what he's done here is he's also put on his website, which is like the more updated version of those same numbers. So you can see here, if you were to be in the top 1% of Bitcoin wealth, you would have, you need 15 Bitcoins or more, obviously, to get into that top 1%. Or let's say to be in the 50th percentile, you need 0.037 Bitcoins. So that's kind of today where we're looking at. But then the next factor is you've got to consider that I don't think the current level of inequality, so to speak, is going to really hinder Bitcoin's adoption. That's not really the important thing. What's really important is it sound money? And is it going to, is it currently still at a deep discount to what it will be post hyper Bitcoinization, which will be sort of in the millions range if we're right about this. So that's one thing to think about there as well. The other factor is just to consider that we are unequal, right? Every person, even on a good day and a bad day, I'm not equal to myself. So of course there are some people who might have more ability, or they might be smarter, they might be more industrious. So even if we started the world with even distribution, well, the more industrious and smart people are probably going to end up making more money anyway. But here's the good side. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Inequality can make all of us better off. In fact, it does make all of us better off. And the way to understand that is to realize that this is not a zero-sum game we're playing here. Some rich billionaire having 5 yachts and 5 private jets does not impinge on my ability to enjoy my own wealth consumption with, whatever wealth that I've accumulated over my lifetime, and as it would for anybody else. So it's not a fixed pie. We can grow that pie much, much bigger. And so a couple examples of the way people kind of go about thinking about this the wrong way, I think is this image is a good example. So you can see in this image, it's just showing how people who are coming from this idea on the left side of this image, they're thinking of it like, oh, anyone at the top must be rich, and they must have done something bad to get there. Well, that's not true. They could have been an honest earner, an entrepreneur. What we're really concerned about is people who are, using, dishonest means to get their wealth. That's what we really care about. So long as, Bitcoin is an honest money, well then that the fact that some people have much more than others doesn't necessarily mean that that the whole system is going to fail just because of the inequality. And so look, I accept that some of this does come back into the typical sort of socialism versus capitalism arguments, right? So some of the arguments that can be applied there are these arguments around how inequality can actually make us more productive overall, and that actually we need a level of inequality for society to really to be prosperous. We can't all just be equal. And one essay that I liked on this particular topic is by George Reisman, and this is a couple years old. It was one of his rebuttal essays of Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. And basically he was talking about how, look, Thomas Piketty's book was very inaccurate and it was coming from a wrong theory. But in any case, he's talking here in this section, and I'll put the link in the description as well. But basically he's saying he's not even going to bother trying to justify 100 to 1 inequality. He's going to go for 1,000 to 1. So he's talking about how these CEOs who are making so much more than the average worker, their decisions have such high consequences that when they do it right, that they're basically generating that much more wealth for everybody else. And so I'm not going to go into sort of detail in that argument. I'll put the link and you can have a look at it. And I think the other big point that we should appreciate is that just because somebody else is wealthy doesn't mean you can't get a benefit out of that also. Because remember, you've got to consider that a rich person's capital, it's not like, that trope or that stereotype of Scrooge McDuck diving into a pool of gold. It's really more like really rich people have their money invested usually into some kind of business, and that's normally invested into productive capital. What does that capital do? It is pushing up the value of your labor, meaning you get paid more for your job, and it is also at the same time lowering the cost of the goods that you purchase. So in that way, You don't have to own the capital in order to benefit from it. You're actually getting a benefit from it just by being able to buy that thing. So let's say you want to buy a t-shirt, and you can buy kind of cheap, good quality t-shirts for $20 instead of maybe in the past, in inflation adjusted terms, it might have been even much more than that. Well, obviously the best example nowadays is with computers and how cheap computing technology has become compared to 30, 40 years ago. So I think this whole concept that Bitcoin is doomed because the inequality is just too great, and that people aren't going to want to work in that system. Well, not really. It's more like people will want to get into it for their own profit incentive, and at the start it'll be really unequal, but over time the people who are more honest and productive will tend to earn more and make more money out of it. So it's not that distinct from the way human society has a sort of power law distribution in many other things as well. So and look, I appreciate that some of these points I brought up today, they would resonate more with you if you're more of a libertarian, or you're more of a conservative, or you're sort of more center right or right wing. Whereas if you're kind of more on the left wing, well, unfortunately, it's not gonna. You can't please everyone. These arguments are probably not going to resonate with you. But ultimately, I think this change will happen anyway, whether people like it or not, whether they like inequality or they believe it's good or bad for them. Everyone's own profit incentive is going to drive them towards holding Bitcoin. And eventually we're going to see more and more waves of people coming in to buy Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin, and they're going to join that sort of hodler army. So in summary, I think this whole Bitcoin wealth concentration and inequality, it's not as bad as what people say it is. On the whole, society is going to be much, much more prosperous anyway. So it's just going to create that much of a bigger pie for everyone. So that's basically why I'm not too worried about it. So if you've enjoyed my explanation on this, please give the video a like or a thumbs up and a subscribe to the channel. Thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next one.